Well, welcome, David Harewood, Hollywood star of television, but also film. It's a great pleasure to interview you today, and we're really grateful to you for giving up your time to speak to the Royal College of Psychiatrists about your experience of psychosis. I'm Adrian James, I'm the president of the Royal College, and your documentary, David Harewood, Psychosis and Me, was a really sort of emotional piece. It was very powerful, a real contribution to destigmatizing psychosis. Not many people speak about psychosis, and it was a journey of discovery, both for the viewer but also for you, as you recollect what you could remember about what happened, but also spoke to family and friends, those closest to you, and that filled in some of the gaps. So David Harewood, psychosis in you, what happened?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I had my psychotic breakdown 30 years ago, and very little was explained, kind of sort of what happened or what it was about, and I sort of knew that you know, the rough outline details of what I'd experienced, but I think it was during. I think it was a couple of years before the documentary. I tweeted to a friend, and I tweeted out that I'd had a breakdown, and that sort of set the ball rolling for this, as you say, this kind of discovery, because I thought I knew what had happened. But when I pitched the documentary, I said, I'd really like to discuss my breakdown and maybe speak to some of the people that I met and, uncover some of the things that I did. But I really had no idea of the facts of psychosis, and I had no idea the journey that I would go on. So the documentary ended up being extraordinarily difficult, far more difficult than I expected it to be, because I was sort of presented with the truth of what happened, and that forced me to kind of come to terms with many of the aspects that originally started to kind of push me over the edge, as it were. Issues to do with race, identity, belonging, and I was suddenly confronted with those things with a BBC camera stuck in my face. So it was really, really tough. So at the same time as trying my level professional best to be a sort of BBC presenter, I was also kind of dealing with this every day with these facts and truth that I was discovering as I went further and further into my medical notes. And the director would just say, "Oh, just hold the notes up and just we'll just get a shot of you pretending to read your notes." But obviously I couldn't help but look down at some of the stuff I was saying, and it was quite upsetting. So I was sort of faced with this truth every day, and staying in a hotel away from my family, which was kind of mirroring the experience that I was having when I was initially having my breakdown, being isolated from friends, being isolated from people who loved me. So I was kind of stuck up in Birmingham in a hotel, with my medical record just sitting on the table. So I was sort of re-traumatized, to be honest with you. So I found it a very, very, very difficult experience. But I'm sure we'll go into this later. I'm extraordinarily. Can you hear that? I'm having some work done downstairs. I'm just wondering if you can hear that.
I can hear it a bit. It's not too bad.
Oh right. Yeah, it was a tough experience, and I now know much more about what happened to me. I'm now much more knowledgeable about psychosis. Prior to doing the documentary, I didn't even know what psychosis really was, because at no point during my initial illness did anybody tell me what had happened to me. There were suspected schizophrenia. Somebody mentioned a psychotic episode, but again, nobody had told me what that was. So the documentary really was a learning process for me, but a very rude awakening to what had happened, and sort of me coming to terms with the difficult truths that I really had sort of really lost control of myself.
So what sort of experiences did you have in terms of your perceptions, your thoughts, your emotions?
Well, I mean, they were quite extraordinary. I have to say, Adrian, they were, and I must admit, when I was hospitalized, I missed them because they were extraordinarily vivid. And I know that the delusions and oral delusions and visual delusions are quite common, but it was extraordinary the amount of times I remember one morning sort of flicking through the Bible, and I thought, right, the next page I'm going to turn to is going to have significance. And I flicked it through, and it literally said, and it mentioned King David. So, that was my name. So all these, there were many, I'm sure they were, obviously now, I'm sure that they were coincidences, but every time somebody sort of saw something or agreed with me on something, it sort of was confirmation that I was on the right path. So I was hearing these, getting these signals and these messages, and hearing voices. I heard the voice of Martin Luther King. And when I was young, very, very young, it was around 10 or 12, I did a school play where I did the I Have a Dream speech. And when this voice appeared in my head that one night, I only had it one time, but the night it appeared in my head, it sort of spoke to me and said, when you played me when you were young, I came into your soul. And just explain this extraordinary sort of concept that when he was assassinated in 1965, I think, or 68, that the whole of reality became his dream. He was speaking to me. He was speaking to me as the sort of dreamer of my reality, and it really was quite extraordinary and quite believable. And I would experience hot and cold flushes, where the only color that would cool me down was the color blue. So I found a particularly blue cushion and was just placing it on my head. There was experiences like that. I would cut out pieces of huge chunks of Shakespeare. I became very, very sort of interested in Shakespeare. So I would read passages of Shakespeare and then cut them out. I had these complete works of William Shakespeare. And I would cut out a passage and stick it on my shoulder and read a bit of Hamlet and put that on my leg, and then just finding things that had connections and finding these bizarre connections. And I'd go for a walk down the street, and once or twice people would kind of stop me and say, "Oh, this is really interesting. This is really interesting. What's going on? Let me work this out." And I was sort of, whenever anyone did that, I was thinking, they're getting it. They're understanding what I'm trying to say. So it was sort of further confirmation that what I was doing was sort of working, but in a kind of subliminal way. It was really, really, really quite extraordinary and very exciting. As I say, some of the friends that came round to my house were saying that I had some great ideas for theatre shows, where I would break the fourth wall and have actors in the audience and actors coming in through bits in the wall and from under the floor. And it all sounded very exciting because I wanted to kind of involve the audience in the play itself. So in order to do that, as I said, I wanted to sort of break this fourth wall, break the comfort of the audience sitting there watching the show, and have them experience the show. So I kept thinking of ways of having the audience be a part of the show. And most of the kids that were around me were actors, and they all found it really, really exciting, and were quite keen to listen and almost be a part of it. So
these were very real experiences, but did a bit of you question it to say, look, this just can't be?
I'm sure early on, there were moments when I thought, that flock of birds flying over my head wasn't really a message from beyond. But once the psychosis kind of took hold of me, most of it became really kind of instructive, and I again, because I'm an actor, I was turning up to auditions thinking, this is going to be a really original idea. So rather than walking into the audition and just doing my audition, I'm going to go and haunt the theatre. And it makes terribly embarrassing for me to think that now, but I went to the theatre 2 hours early and just kept walking around the theatre as if I was some kind of ethereal creature, which I thought was a fantastic idea. But obviously everyone just thought I was, behaving bizarrely. And at one point the director came up and said, maybe I should go home. And I kind of went, oh, they didn't get it. I was thinking maybe they didn't quite understand what I was trying to do. So that wasn't a check on me to then go, I need to go and see a doctor. Again, I think had I have had that early intervention at that point, and somebody had sat me down and said, look, we think you're experiencing something, I probably would have gone to some kind of early intervention, but that never happened. So the illness and the delusions just got more and more extreme, and eventually I think I just lost control of it.
And your friends and family were concerned about you. What do you think the things that they saw that were worrying?
Well, my family were in Birmingham and I was in London, so they didn't really know what was happening. But my friends could see that one minute I was very lucid and seemed okay, and then I would suddenly crash out and want to go to bed, and I would just suddenly just sort of go to sleep for hours and hours, and then wake up and be quite hyper. So my moods were quite extreme, and they didn't quite know. Because as young actors, we're always messing around and always sort of playing and sort of being quite extrovert and having ideas and discussing new ways of communicating and improvising. The whole idea of improvising, I think, and that's where for me it got confusing, because I felt like I didn't particularly I wasn't enjoying the early part of my career, and that was one of the reasons that I had the breakdown, was that I really didn't enjoy the professional side of theatre. And there were again issues of racism, which again we'll go into. But so for me, the sort of improvisational angle of my breakdown was almost like doing experimental. Like I thought I was doing experimental theatre. So walking down the street and just talking to strangers, or street acting for me felt like I was being experimental, and sort of it felt quite freeing, as opposed to being in a very structured rehearsal and a structured theatrical space. For me, it was kind of revolutionary to be out on the streets, acting on the tube, or and again, because I am an actor and because I'm quite an extrovert, it was fun and quite liberating to suddenly go onto the tube and start singing, and hearing and people joining in. And when people joined in, I thought, this is great. So I was sort of constantly performing. That's what it was. What it was for me, it was like a continual performance, a freeing a freeing of my sort of acting talents, rather than being in some kind of structured, boring theatrical setting where you work from 9 to 5 and with breaks in between. I hated my first 2-3 years of the business, so this felt very freeing to me, very, very liberating, to just go out to the streets and just do it for free and with anybody.
So you've spoken about some of the contributory factors that led to your psychosis. Were there any other factors? You felt you were away from your family, those who supported you, you were concerned about your acting and your experiences there. Were there any other factors that you think contributed to you developing psychosis?
I mean, yes. I mean, I think, yes, loneliness certainly played a part. I had a very uncomfortable experience on stage. My whole first 2 years of being a professional actor was sort of because just I really did not enjoy my first 2 years. So I was kind of constantly sort of tiptoeing around. It was the only environment that I'd gone from school to drama school, safe environments where people are, people had sort of accepted me for being a bit of a clown, a bit of a comedian, someone who's quite funny. But going into the profession, I felt I was rejected. I felt that I couldn't, where I would normally just play the clown and be able to skate through. I couldn't do that for some reason. It frustrated me. I couldn't be myself. I felt like I was out of control and sort of a sort of almost a victim, really. I allowed the world to dictate who I was, when I always felt I was quite secure in who I was. This kind of clowny, knockabout guy, and suddenly I'm in the professional world, being reviewed and being talked about, and there's lots of snipey comments, and people accused me of being arrogant, and I couldn't judge how I was being perceived, and now obviously now I'm much stronger. I don't really care. I know who I am, but because I was suddenly thrust into a very unfamiliar situation, touring with a theatre show, meeting new people, I found it very difficult to gauge how I was being perceived, and sort of lost myself, lost who I was. And as I say, there was obviously the racism. There was, I think I did start drinking alcohol, and then when I came back to London, this is once the psychosis had already set in. I then started to smoke marijuana, and that tipped me. I would say that certainly accelerated my descent. So yeah, there were lots of different factors that I think played in this.
So there were obviously lots of traumas in your life. Can you tell me about your experience of racism?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are very difficult to talk about, but I sort of grown up in the 70s in England, where you'd see in Birmingham, you'd see National Front signs daubed everywhere, spray painted everywhere. Your trip to school would be a bit hairy, because you'd be quite often be chased by skinheads or attacked by racists, and so walking the streets in the 70s was quite dangerous. As I say, you could be attacked at any minute. Certain schools where you played football, you knew you had to sort of not even get changed after you play the game. You just literally have your bags at the side of the pitch and you just leave. So if you're playing away at their ground, you literally just had to get out of their area because you knew you were going to face attacks at the end of the game. And then I guess I've always been the only black person in the circles that I'm in, and sort of having to tread very carefully and sort of allow people to kind of get comfortable with you was always something that I experienced. When I got to drama school, nobody mentioned colour. Nobody mentioned my colour there, and I think I sort of fell into a false sense of security. I didn't think that my skin colour would be as political as it would be, but certainly upon leaving, everything was about my colour, and I sort of was reduced in the newspapers and in critiques and in reviews. I felt that my whole character was reduced to just a black actor. So David Harewood was no longer an individual. I was just a black actor, and that sort of dismissive quality I found very destabilizing. Reviewers were quite racist, talking about how I looked and I didn't look like Romeo. Romeos aren't black, and most of the reviews were written in a way of almost just to undermine. And again, I was the first generation of sort of drama school trained black actors. I was, prior to me, there were maybe one or two. I think Hugh Corshare was probably one of the first black actors to be at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And then my generation came out, and so we were taking these roles, probably many for the first time, and reviewers didn't like it, and wrote their reviews as if who are these guys coming here and taking this part, because it's not really Romeo and Juliet, or it's not really King Lear, it's a black King Lear. And not saying anything about my choices, not saying anything about the performance. It's always about my race. So in the end, I stopped reading them because it just kept undermining me. I felt that I was being erased, and so I stopped reading reviews. But then, you start to understand that, the significance of being a black actor, what it meant. It meant that you were never going to, I was used to playing the leading role. I was used to being in a Chekhov and then in a Pinter and then in a Dostoevsky and playing a Russian and then playing a drama school. Nothing, you could do anything. So my mind was full of possibilities. But when I came out, I suddenly realized that just wasn't going to be the case. I was just going to be the black actor. And, the possibilities of playing that romantic lead were gone. The possibilities of playing this, the very three-dimensional character, gone. I suddenly found my parts and the possibilities of what I could do really, really limited and restricted. Again, that started to undermine me because the crushing reality of the fact that I wasn't going to be, playing Hamlet or Macbeth. I wasn't going to be, playing, the leading characters. I found that very scary. So, one of the reasons why, remember in the documentary, I was walking around town and saying that I'm invisible and I'm disappearing, because at one point I thought to myself, where are the examples of successful black actors? Let me walk through town and see if I can find a single movie poster or theatre poster with a black face on the poster. And that was one of the reasons why I went through walking through town, and this was 30 years ago, but I walked through and I didn't see a single black image on any advert. And then I walked through the West End and I didn't see a single black face on any of those big posters on outside any of the theatres. And I suddenly thought, what the fuck am I doing? I've got no chance of succeeding because I'm invisible. And that really started to scare me. It really started to, as I say, undermine my sense of self and my value, my sense of value. And you turn your television on. Normally, when I'm in America or working abroad, adverts in TV shows, in politics, law, news, finance, in whatever you'll see people of color. Let's switch over to our finance minister, finance guy now, and it's a black woman, and they're talking about banking, and then you come back to England, and I don't see that, and you sort of feel that it's sort of you feel sort of smothered by. You feel your importance, your sense of value start to drop. So that's where I think the racism plays into psychosis, because you look around and you say, well, where are we actually succeeding in this country? And I think if you are black and you're experiencing psychosis, those are the things that you look for. You start to see, well, I'm just not getting anywhere. We're not getting anywhere. We're struggling, and that can be hugely destabilizing, hugely, particularly then when you're sectioned, and everybody sectioning you is white, everybody treating you is white, all the nurses are white. It can be very destabilizing.
So you were obviously at the top of your game, and then you had all these frightening, traumatizing experiences, and you were admitted to hospital. Can you tell me about your experience of care? What treatment did you get? How did you feel that you were looked after?
I don't remember most of the my treatment in London, because I really was. I was pretty out of it. I know, again, from my friends, they tell me that when I got to the Whittington, I was very distressed, and I sort of was screaming and running around the hospital in a very distressed state. They called the hospital security, who saw a big black man running around and thought, I'm not having any of that. So then they called the police, and the police arrived with riot shields, and I was then sat on by 6 police officers and sedated. For me, that was, I have a very, very brief sort of memory of when they rushed me and caught me, which was terrifying, because in my head, in my delusions, I thought the devils had got me, as it were. So it was a very scary experience. And then I think I had about 3 or 4 days where I really was out, just completely out of it. I was very lucky that my friends convinced them that I was an actor, and the reason why apparently I was speaking in different languages, but I was kind of reciting bits of plays that I knew, and my friends were adamant that they were not going to leave me, and were trying to explain to the hospital staff that the reason why I was doing this was because I was an actor. But I think had they not have been there, I think the outcome might have been very, very different. But I think after about 4 or 5 days being in the Whittington, I literally sat up in bed and sort of was quite cognizant, really. Again, people were asking me where I'd been and what I remembered. I think I'd been on, chlorpromazine was the drug that I was taking. I was very bruised. I couldn't because the policeman had been sitting on me. I think physically I was quite, now I remember, because I remember at the time I felt very sore for weeks, and I think part of the reason was because of how I was detained. And again, I don't remember anybody sort of talking to me about. I don't remember any one-on-ones with people saying and mentioning psychosis. I don't remember anybody really paying that much attention to me. Yeah. In Birmingham, I think my family doctor, one thing I had a bit of a relapse in Birmingham, and my family doctor spoke to my mother, and together with my mother, he said, I think we should maybe, section him and put him on a kind of a program of antipsychotics, which they did for about 10 days. And that was much more regimented, and tablets in the morning, tablets in the afternoon, tablets in the evening. Again, on a locked ward, but again, not much in the way of people speaking to me about what was happening to me. I would still say the documentary was the first time I really understood what had happened to me, and that was, as I say, 30 years later.
So you did improve. What do you think led to your improvement?
Certainly rest. I have no idea how antipsychotics work, but I gather they slow everything down. Maybe that's what I needed. I needed to just stop. My brain was spinning. It felt like my brain was spinning, and my thoughts were spinning, which led to me not sleeping, which probably led to mania. So I think having rest and just slowing my thoughts down, I think probably did give me some time to recover. But I've never needed medication since. So I think there's something like 15% of people never need medication. So maybe I just fall into that 15%.
And do you yourself now have your own plan to keep yourself well? Are there things that you do, things that you don't do in order to look after your own mental health?
I try and rest when I can. I don't overwork. I'm prone to overworking, and my dad had a breakdown actually. So, and his was as a result of overworking. So I'm normally in England for only 2 months of the year, because I work abroad most of the time. And in those 2 months, once people know I'm back, and I tend to agree. In previous years, I've tended to agree to doing a lot of that. And I guess that's a typical working class boy. Turning work down is you don't turn work down. You say yes to everything. So, but I think now I'm getting to the stage where I know that it's better for me to be careful in accepting too much, because if people desire too much of me, I end up sort of on the phone to this guy, then dashing into town for that meeting, dashing back for that meeting, and not really having any chance or opportunity to rest. So lockdown was a really great time for me to just kick back and slow everything down. So I feel very lucky that I have actually had the opportunity, and it's taught me that I really need to do that now, rather than agreeing. Because normally, sometimes it starts before I even finish. So if I'm working in March and I'm free in April, people start phoning me late March and saying, "Can you come and do this when you're back in London?" And before I know it, my whole hiatus is booked up with work. And it's important for me to start learning how to say no. and giving myself a rest. And I think I've learnt that this hiatus.
Now, some aspects of your care, big chunks of it, were very frightening and I think traumatizing in themselves. And there'll be lots of psychiatrists watching this. What are the sorts of things that you would want them to do to make the experience of somebody in your situation in the future? What would you want them to do to ensure that the experience is as good as it can be?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I know I was quite combative, verbally combative, in my early meetings with two psychiatrists or duty doctors who I went to visit. My friends were worried, so they, on 2 occasions, sent me to doctors, and both were quite dismissive, and both were, once they encountered how combative I was, I think perhaps they were a little bit. I mean, one of them actually said, he thinks he's Lenny Henry, which really annoyed me, and really annoyed my friends. We both thought, what the fuck is that? It was almost
terrible.
And one of them said I was sly. So, I can understand that people who do come can come into that situation experiencing early psychosis, may be quite a handful. But I think it's imperative that people are honest and let them know that if somebody said to me, I think you're experiencing mania, and I think you probably need to rest. Just spelled it out. Somebody rather than let's say being quite so dismissive. If they were straightforward and honest with me, I think I might have listened. But I once I started to sniff out, because again, particularly because I'm black, I was very suspicious in that situation. So I'd advise them, maybe gaining their trust. I don't know how, but working hard to bring that person's defenses down and being very honest with them about what state they're in, and being just being honest. Because once you sniff out that a person is being dismissive, or once you sniff out that a person is sort of even perhaps underestimating your intelligence, you might start switching off and disengaging from the process. So I think it's important that they work hard to gain that person's trust, because it's only through gaining that trust that you can then start to feed them the idea that they might not be well, and that even though this experience for you at the moment seems to be rather exciting, and you seem to have lots of great ideas that you could be experiencing early forms of mania, which if you're not careful you could lose control of it. So had somebody explain that to me and explain that to my friends, we would have maybe taken the tablets and maybe tried to get some rest. But because I sniffed out that the dismissiveness, I withdrew a little bit.
Well, David, those experiences you had were totally unacceptable, and I just wanted to be absolutely clear that should not have happened, and wanted to apologise for you on behalf of the profession. That really shouldn't have happened, and we really need to do better to ensure that the experience of all patients is a good one. I mean, what advice would you give to somebody in your position who is experiencing psychosis and is perhaps frightened of the situation around them, but also scared about receiving care? What would be your advice to them?
I mean, I'd say try and seek out some. I know that there are an increasing number of bodies that's, specifically if they're black, that there's a specific number of bodies that cater for black mental health, or just discussion groups. Or, I know there's Black Minds Matter, and I would say that if you're frightened of sort of the main bodies, I would say seek out a more targeted body where you can perhaps feel you may not be quite so suspicious. I now have I've had white middle class therapists. Since my documentary, I now have a black therapist. I particularly wanted to find a black therapist because they might understand they might understand my worldview and what might understand my experiences from a slightly different perspective, and that has helped me. That has helped me in because we have a familiar set of circumstances. We have something in common. So dealing with that has benefited me. So I would say that there are enough resources out there. There are resources out there, particularly in Lambeth, to seek out somebody who you might be more comfortable with. But I would stress that these issues are best dealt with professionally rather than by self-medicating, which could be either alcohol or continuing to smoke. I think it's a lot of these issues are best dealt with professionally, and even if it's just having a conversation with somebody to let them know how you feel, the earlier you can do that, the better, because once you start to lose control of it, I think you're at greater risk of even further damage, I think, down the line.
So I've just started as president of the Royal College, and I've made race equality one of my top 4 priorities. What do you want me to do? What should I do in my position?
Again, I think there are a number of black professionals now in working in mental health and in therapy. I encourage you to speak to them. We encourage you to get some of them in, maybe do some talks, because it is a very destabilizing, very it's as I say, because of the effects of racism, the cumulative effects of racism. Once you're in a situation where you are deteriorating mentally, the amount of suspicion that is built up through no fault of yours, Adrian. I mean, but having been confronted by a white doctor who is kind of prescribing to you, why you're not well. Again, for us it can be very. It can only add to our level of mistrust. So I think unconscious bias training as well, I think, would be very good with some of your staff, just to make sure that they are aware of how sensitive one has to be around somebody who's experiencing black mental health, because again, it might not be, it's nothing that you guys have done personally, but it's the cumulative build-up of experience from years, and that sense of being undervalued, that sense of being passed over, that sense of being in a society that doesn't value. I mean, I would say extraordinarily, but racism is a much more admitted fact in America than it is here. But yet, I have had a sense of value given to me through my success in America. The way that I'm treated, the way that I'm spoken to, it gives me a sense of, I'm succeeding here. I've grown exponentially in the last 10 years because of my experience in America. But I can be honest with you, being here in England, my value by the day just drops. Because I don't see myself reflected. I don't see myself reflected in government. I don't see myself reflected on television. I don't see the issues that affect me being discussed or being talked about. Even though we've had this moment of Black Lives Matter, which was very emotional for most black people. We had 2 weeks where we were quite visible, and even though the footballers are still kneeling, and there was this initial outpouring of understanding. I do get a sense that window is already closing. already closing. And we're already starting to feel, which is a discussion amongst many of us, we feel as though the discussion is already moving on to Brexit, and already moving on to other subject matters where we'll already becoming less visible, and that's something that really does undermine me. And as I say, in the mental health sphere, that can lead to mistrust and anger. And if you're unlucky, you might be on the receiving end of some of that animosity. With a person of color, when a person of color comes into is being sanctioned, because they will just be angry.
Yeah, for very understandable reasons. And I completely take your point about the sort of the window opening and closing. And at the college, we've appointed two presidential leads on race equality. We've set up a task force that I'm now chairing, and I want to create something which is permanent, so that window never closes until it's not an issue. I suspect that's going to be some time, but we really do. I completely accept what you say, and we will take that forward. Perhaps you'd like to come and interview me in 3 years' time and see what we've really done, whether we've actually done anything at all. So, David, I just wanted to talk about acting for a little. I see lots of people who have experience of psychosis, and they tell me that it is like somebody taking over their mind and their body. And of course, as an actor, it's your job to get into the mind and body of someone else. Has your experience of psychosis been helpful in that? And has being an actor, do you think, been good for your mental health?
Yes and yes, I would say. I mean, I was talking earlier on about the sort of improvising all the time, and sort of finding that very liberating. And again, I think specifically because I'm an actor, a lot of my initial acting out was sort of performance based, and I'm lucky in that there was no sort of aggression. It was very liberating to behave and very freeing to be able to sort of do whatever I wanted to do. That was as a result of being placed in a box. You're a black actor, that's what you do. You only do black actor stuff. I wanted to break out of that. I was like, well, fuck that. I don't want to do anything. So that was part of the reason why I started to sort of play up and act out. And as I say, it was incredibly liberating, having gone right the way through to the point where I got myself into a mental institution. I think, again, it's tremendous. I always think about this, that everything that you as an actor, everything that happens in your life is rich material. Mm-hmm. And there was one point where I was in a mental institution. I think it was in the Whittington, when I sort of had sort of a lucid moment, and I remember there was a guy who was just measuring random spaces on the floor, measuring these random spaces with a little tape measure, and the actor in me took over. And it was one thing that we do as actors, we love to people watch. Something you do at Soho, you can sit in a bar and just watch people, and you watch behavior. And as the actor in me took over, and I just watched this guy for about an hour. It was absolutely fascinating. I started watching the behavior of different patients, and I found it really extraordinary. So it did actually help me. Even the kind of actor the acting part of my mind was observing and taking in all this information. The nurses, how they reacted to us, and then even to get out of one of the institutions in Birmingham. I'd spent the morning talking to my brother, and he'd said at one point I started doing the sort of Close Encounters of the Third Kind theme tune, where the aliens land, thinking I was communicating with him, and he just sort of grabbed me and he just said, "Dave, if you want to get out of here, you've got to start acting normal." And again, because he said acting, I went, acting normal. I've got to act like a normal person. So I suddenly sort of thought, right, okay, this whole thing is going to be a performance. So the way I got out there, even though I was probably still not particularly well, but I set myself a little routine of normal behavior: brush my teeth, comb my hair, tidy my bed, make my bed, try and talk to the nurses. So I just gave myself a kind of normal, so I kind of played the part of a normal person in order to get out. So it was a tremendous help for me, because I just thought this whole thing is a performance. And I'm not going to answer back, because before I would say, what's in the tablets? Every time the pills came round, there'd be this whole palaver of, what's in the tablets? Why should I take them? Are you drugging me? I just said to myself, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to take them, say thank you, and not be so combative. So my acting became a way of getting out of there. It was all a performance. And I think in my profession, I think it's been a tremendous help, because, again, as actors, we have to obviously put ourselves in very vulnerable positions quite a lot. And I came across the term post-traumatic growth once I'd had this my breakdown years later, and I think that definitely applies to me, because I'm fearless when it comes to, I have no embarrassment factor. If someone says get up and do a dance or something, I just do it. I'm quite free like that, and I a lot of people have commented on how easy I find being in those circumstances. I've done plays with non-actors, young offenders, and had them grab me up, throw me across the stage, be very aggressive with me. But I'm quite comfortable in that environment, because I know I don't have the normal sort of sensibilities that some actors do. I'm not scared like that. And I think that's a lot to do with my breakdown. I'm quite fearless when it comes to putting myself in. If I've been in a mental institution, that's about as extreme as you can get. So I kind of tend to find that it's helped me enormously being sectioned, because I know that my behaviour has been deemed unacceptable, and as an actor, I can push that as far as I want to push that as far as I can.
And one of the situations you found yourself in as an actor was as the CIA counterterrorism centre director, and you were line managing somebody whose character experienced bipolar, Carrie Mattison, and so you were her line manager, and it was a big part of Homeland. How did you find that experience, having had the experiences yourself?
Well, I was very sensitive to what Claire was doing, and also I just thought she was just magnificent in what she'd done. She also had done prior to Homeland, had done a show called Temple Grandin, where she actually won an Emmy, playing an autistic lady who basically revolutionized the way they slaughter animals in America. She developed a whole new way of a painless way of slaughtering animals, and basically went to the High Court and changed the whole way that they slaughter their cows. But so I knew she had this skill of sort of playing people who had these very sort of mental conditions. And she told me one day, and I was trying to get under her skin one day. I kind of said, how did she get into playing Carrie when she was manic? And she said, well, YouTube is full of people who are having these manic episodes, and they just record themselves. And so she kind of spent hours watching these people just talking into the camera, talking into their phone while they're having these kind of manic episodes, and had seen how it was this stream of consciousness. And I was telling her about my breakdown and how some of the things that I got up to, and so I thought it was brilliant the way it was handled. I thought the writers did it brilliantly. And I also thought it was brilliant the way that they one could see that there were two sides of the coin. At one point, it made her see things in a highly original way and be very, very specific with her connections, with connecting Brody to Nazir and this happening to them. She was brilliant. But at the same time, it was kind of reckless. Mm-hmm. And I think my character, Estes, would accept some of her condition, but not all of it. So I knew that at one point, Estes would draw the line, whereas the character of Saul, played by Mandy Patinkin, mm-hmm. just see that she was brilliant. So that's how I thought it was quite brilliant in that he gave her permission to be her brilliant, chaotic self, whereas I drew the line and was much more logical. And I did enjoy shutting her down every now and then. I did enjoy that.
So, David, you decided to speak up about your experiences. What was it that made you really go public about it, and how did you find that experience?
I've got to be honest. I didn't expect any of it, and I was overwhelmed by the reaction completely. I have spoken about my experiences personally to friends quite over the years. It's never been something that I've been secretive about. But when I originally tweeted in support of people, on World Mental Health Day, I just rather flippantly really tweeted, as somebody who's had a breakdown, just want to say there's a way back. Good, have a good day, go easy on yourself, and get some help. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. But I sort of put my phone down, got on a plane, flew to LA, and sort of turned my phone on as I was getting out of the airport. 40,000 retweets, and my phone was like going crazy. There was ITV wanted to speak to me, BBC, Guardian, and I suddenly realised, my God, I hadn't gone public with this. People were too busy asking me if I want to play James Bond or Doctor Who. So this thing really sort of caught fire, and I then wrote a piece for the Guardian, and a friend read that piece. One of the friends who was around when I was originally having the breakdown read the piece and commented that that's not how I remember it. So I thought, have I forgotten something here? And I sort of pitched the idea to a producer. Here's a great idea. Why don't I go back and uncover what really happened to me? And it all went quiet. And then after about 3 or 4 months, I got a message saying that it had been commissioned and it was all going ahead. But what I didn't understand was that I of course didn't remember that I'd literally buried all of the pain, all of the discomfort, all of the fear of my psychoses. I remembered some of the fun bits, some of the manic bits. So the morning when in the documentary, when my 2 friends took me back to the Whittington, was a really, really difficult morning for me, and that's when I suddenly remembered that there was actually a really scary and uncomfortable angle to my psychosis, and the rest of the filming was really tough for me, because
Did you get any support from the BBC? Did you?
Yes, they gave me I had a duty of care, so I did have a therapist on hand, but because I was up in Birmingham, my therapist was in London. Mm-hmm. We were filming 4 days a week in Birmingham, and I just didn't realise how tough it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they did. To be fair, I don't think I thought I was good with it. I thought I was in a good place. I knew what happened, when in reality I didn't. I wasn't in a good place. Mm. So it was a real revelation to me that I hadn't dealt with many of the issues that originally sent me over the edge. And yeah, it was really, really tough. And then I went straight back to work in Vancouver, and then came back, did all the press for it, did all the TV interviews, which again overworked myself, and again didn't underestimated how much that was gonna, how much toll that would take, and the whole thing put me in a very emotional place, and I didn't watch it on the night, and then just got overwhelmed by a tsunami of love and appreciation really after. When the morning, I always take my dog for when I'm back. I always take my dog for a walk. That's my start of my day. Take the dog for a walk. I don't take my phone, and I just have a morning of just an hour of just walking, and I find it really beneficial and really helpful for me to start my day. And I took my dog for a walk that morning. Literally within 5 minutes of getting to the common, somebody waved me down and just came over and was like, "Oh my God, your program's amazing." And my dad, and I just want to say thank you, because we didn't talk about it, and suddenly seeing you talk about it made us talk about it, and burst into tears, and we both sobbing on in the car. And then I walked up, and then another guy came over, and literally my walk around the common every 2 minutes was stopped by somebody coming up to me. And I'm not just, so many people have experienced psychosis, whether it was a son, brother, a dad, a mom, and people just wanted to thank me because they'd not spoken about it, or there'd always been shame in the family about it, and having me, this actor, talk about it seemed to be a great help for people. And I sort of began to understand in that moment that I think I'd done something, because I think it was the moment where I thought, fuck, have I ruined my career? But it actually went the other way. People were really found that the program took them on a real journey. And I think it was the honesty people responded to. I was just overwhelmed with love and support, and it seems to have started a conversation. I know the charity Mind, told me that calls about psychosis rose by 107% the very next day. People were suddenly talking about it, and black communities were talking about it. I did several of these webinars with black institutions, the BBC, Black and Asian Network, and so many people were saying that this is something that had happened in their families, and again, nobody had spoken about it because of shame or the taboo. So I think I sort of inadvertently started the conversation, and I'm quite proud of that. So now that I'm through the emotional, because literally whenever anyone talked about it, I would literally just burst into tears. But I think I'm through that now, I am very, very proud of it, and still get people approaching me saying, well, I think it's done some good.
Well, David, I think the documentary was amazing. I think it's really helped others to actually speak about their experience. I think you've done more to deal with the stigmatization of mental illness in the time you spent on this than I've done in my 30 years. I think it's been an incredible contribution, and I really want to thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's been immensely rewarding. It'll be helpful to our members to improve services for people who will have your experience in the future. And I really did want to assure you that we will take the issues that you've raised very seriously, and we will deal with them. I'll give you my word on that. So if you did want to come back and interview me in 3 years' time, and if you wanted to speak to our members more widely, we have a big international congress. It's in Birmingham next year. We'd be delighted if you would agree to do that. So thank you so much, David Harewood. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for asking me, and I'm very proud of my association with you, and anything I can do to help is I'm all yours.
That's great. Thanks so much, David.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.